All right, so we're going back to 4.2. This time we're doing the second half. We're going to be looking at word problems that involve consecutive integers. You guys actually started working on this in Algebra 1. So when we bring it back now for Algebra 2, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. But first we need to define consecutive integers. Can somebody define for me what consecutive means? One right after the other or in order. Good. So consecutive integers are integers that follow each other in order. So let's say, for example, I give you the integer 1. What would the next consecutive integer be? 2. What would the one after that be? 3. And let's do one more. 4, and so on, right? So now let's talk about this in general terms. How do I get from 1 to 2? What do I do there? You add 1. The next number is 3. How do I get from 1 to 3? You add 2. The next number consecutively is 4. How do I get from 1 to 4? Add 3. Does this make sense? So if we're talking about it in general terms, if x is the number that you start with, to get to the next integer, you add 1, so that would be x plus 1. To get to the one after that would be x plus 2. And to get to the one after that would be x plus 3, and so on. Make sense? Okay. So then we want to look at consecutive odd and consecutive even integers. Let's look at the consecutive even first. So those are odd or even integers that follow each other in order. So if I am looking at consecutive even, let's say that the first one I give you is 2. What would the next even number be? 4. What would the next number after that be? 6. And let's do one more. 8. And so on. Okay. So let's look at this in general terms. How do I get from 2 to 4? You add 2 because we're starting, and if you guys look at the number line, we have to skip over 3 and go straight to 4. So we're adding 1, 2 in order to get to 4. Your next even number is 6. How do I get from 2 to 6? Add 4. The next one is 8. So how do I get from 2 to 8? Add 6. So it's plus 2, plus 4, plus 6, and so on. Yes? Okay, so let's look at what the odd ones do, because this is where students get confused. So if I'm looking at my first odd number, let's say it's just 1. What's the next odd number? 3. What's the one after that? 5. And let's do one more. 7. Okay. And so on, right? Okay, how do I get from 1 to 3? You add 2, because we're going from 1, skipping 2, and going straight to 3. How do I get from 1 to 5? Add 4. How do I get from... And you know I'm recording it too, so now everybody knows. How do I get from 1 to 7? Add 6. So I add 2, add 4, add 6. So it doesn't matter if they're consecutive odd or consecutive even. You're still adding 2 each time because you're always having to skip over the odd or the even number that comes right after it, okay? So if we're looking at this in general terms, oops. I wrote too big. Okay, so if we're looking at it in general terms then, if x is your first odd or even, doesn't matter which, the next one is going to be x plus 2. To get to the next number, you have to skip over 1, so that's going to be x plus 4. And then you skip again, so that's x plus 6. So if it's odd or even, it doesn't matter which, you're still counting by 2s, okay? So example 1. We have the product of 2 consecutive positive integers is 42. Find the 2 integers and their sum. Okay, so the way that I do these problems is I always first list out what the integers I'm looking for is so that I know what it is I'm working with. So we're looking at 2 consecutive positive integers. So these are not consecutive odd or even, they're just consecutive. We always start with x. So what would my next consecutive integer be if I start with x? x plus 1. You have to add 1 to get to the next one, right? So let's look at the problem now. So the way that I do this is I just read the problem and I write out an equation as I'm reading it. So the product of those two integers, what does product mean I'm doing? So product means that we're multiplying. So that's going to be x times x plus 1 is 42. So what does that mean? Equals 42. Okay, guys, what does it look like you should do next? How would we solve? What would you do first? Distribute. So distribute the x into the parentheses. So that's going to give me x squared plus x equals 42. I cannot solve unless the whole thing is equal to what? So what will you do next? Subtract 42. So that gives me x squared plus x minus 42 equals 0. How can I solve? Diamond method. So we need the two numbers that multiply to negative 42 and add up to positive 1. Negative 6, positive 7. So I'm going to move my work up here. That's going to give me x minus 6 times x plus 7 equals 0. Use the zero product property. So you set each one of those equal to 0. So what are the two answers that I get? Positive 6 and negative 7. Now, a lot of students stop here, but they didn't answer the question. The question is, find the two integers and their sum. Which of these answers is the one that I need to use? I was asked to find two consecutive what? Positive. One of these is not positive. Which one? Negative 7. So my first integer is 6. What is the next integer? If we are looking for positive consecutive. 7. Okay? We're not odd or even, we're just consecutive. And then the second part of the question asked me to find their sum. So the sum of these two numbers is 6 plus 7, which is what? 13. So you have to make sure that you're actually answering the whole question. So the answer to the question is, my two integers are 6 and 7. Their sum is 13. All right, example 2 wants us to find two consecutive even integers. It did not say they had to be positive. Such that the square of the second decreased by the first is 134. Okay, guys, whenever we're looking for these types of things, your first integer you always call x. Okay, so x is my first one. If we are looking for even consecutive, what would the next even number after x be? X plus 2. Okay, because you have to skip over the odd number to get to the next even number. So let's write our equation based on this. So such that the square of the second, x is my first one, so x plus 2 is my second. So that's going to be x plus 2 squared decreased by the first. What does decreased by the first mean? Subtracting the first one, which is x, is 134, means equals 134. Okay, guys, so I have x plus 2 squared. Am I allowed to distribute the squared? No. What do I have to do? You have to FOIL it. So expand x plus 2 times x plus 2 minus x equals 134. And what I want you guys to do right now is do x plus 2 times x plus 2 for me. So when you guys did FOIL or box on that, what did you all get? X squared plus 4x plus what? plus 4 minus x equals 134. Do you see anything else that we could do? Combine like terms. So you're going to combine 4x minus x. And then we also have to get the whole thing equal to 0. So are you guys okay if I subtract 134 at the same time? Okay. So that's going to give me x squared plus 3x minus 130 equals 0. What factoring method would you guys use? Diamond. So what two numbers multiply to negative 130 and add up to positive 3? Anybody? Natalie, what'd you get? 13, negative 10. So this factors 2. X plus 13 times x minus 10 equals 0. What I want you guys to do now is find the two possibilities for x. So solve this. Tell me what two answers you got for x. We set each one equal to 0, so x plus 13 equals 0. X minus 10 equals 0. And we're going to subtract 13. No. So I'm going to subtract 13. So we get, let me rewrite that. And then I'm also going to add 10. That should be a 0. So that's going to give me my two possibilities for x are negative 13 and positive 10. Give me a thumbs up if you got both of those for x. Okay, good. All right, so let's think about this though. These are our two possibilities for x, which is the first consecutive integer, not for the whole thing. So these are just the two possibilities for x, but they had to be what? What were my x's supposed to be? Evens. So can I eliminate one of my answers? Which one?
13.
The negative 13. And I want to be very, very clear here. I am not eliminating negative 13 because it is negative. I'm eliminating it because it is odd. And the problem says that our integers are supposed to be even. Okay? So, make sure that you're actually reading the problem. It won't always specify that they have to be positive, okay? But it will tell you if it's consecutive, positive consecutive, odd, or even. So my x, the first integer, is even, which is 10. So then what would the next even number be? 12. So my two integers are 10 and 12. All right, so example 3 wants us to find two consecutive odd integers such that the square of the larger is 10 more than 5 times the smaller. All right, guys, so see if you can help me out. I'm looking for two consecutive odds. So my first integer is always what? X. Now, if I'm looking for a consecutive odd, my next one is going to be what? X plus? Think about it. If I'm looking at consecutive odd, I'm still skipping over the even. So it's still going to be x plus what? 2. Okay? So your x, consecutive odd and consecutive even, they're the same. It's the starting point, x, that makes the difference. Okay? But if you're starting at an odd, to get to the next odd, you have to skip the even. So you're only adding 2 each time. Okay? All right, so let's write this as an equation. The square of the larger. Of these two, x and x plus 2, which one is bigger? X plus 2. So this is going to be x plus 2 squared is, what does is mean? Equals 10 more than 5 times the smaller. 5 times the smaller is going to be what? 5x. And 10 more means that I plus 10. I always do the multiplication part first because sometimes it says 10 less than 3 times the smaller one or whatever, which means you would have to subtract from the end. So I always put the addition or subtraction at the end just so that it's consistent. Okay, so let's solve this. We actually did x plus 2 squared already in the previous problem. So what did we get when we did that? X squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 5x plus 10. Okay, guys, I want to get the whole thing equal to what? 0. So we already did x plus 2 squared in the previous problem, so that's going to give us x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 5x plus 10. And then you need to get the whole thing equal to 0. So you subtract 5x from both sides, and you subtract 10 from both sides. So that gives us x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. So we're going to use diamond method. So I need the two numbers that multiply to negative 6 and add up to negative 1, which are negative 3 and 2. So that's x minus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0. When I set each one of those equal to 0, I would get, I add 3, so we would get x equals 3 and subtract 2, x equals negative 2. Now the problem wanted us to find two consecutive odd integers, so I can eliminate negative 2. So I had two choices for x, the first integer, 3 and negative 2, but the problem specifically wanted us to find the odd. So I'm not eliminating negative 2 because it's negative, I'm eliminating it because it's an even number. So my only starting integer would be 3. So the next odd integer after 3, or x plus 2, is 5. So my two integers are 3 and 5.